Christopher Nolan is one of our great directors working today. There's just no question. Oppenheimer is miraculous. It is such an achievement. But so are The Dark Knight, Interstellar. He has created some of my favorite films. In fact, Interstellar is one of my all-time favorite films. It is amazing. And in genre, he's worked magic that we haven't seen from too many directors. But I still went into The Odyssey with some questions. I was really unsure what we were going to get because the first couple trailers made it seem like this was going to be an action film, and not all the special effects were that great in a couple of those trailers. But I still went in knowing in my head this was going to be a Christopher Nolan film, and yeah, it pays off, but there's a lot to talk about. So let's start with the story. You don't need to know The Odyssey to know this film. You probably know more of The Odyssey than you even expect, just on the fact that The Odyssey has impacted so many stories, so many narratives over the 3,000 years since it was created. It is a miraculous piece of fiction that kind of talks to the human psyche, I think. But what's really interesting is that Christopher Nolan has taken that story, that heart of the story, and he's modernized it. And I think in the past I've looked at his films and I've often thought that he almost mythologizes his topics. It's almost like he's creating a film set in modern times, but it's actually a myth that he's dealing with. I mean, I think The Dark Knight is a good example of that, but I think something like, even Tenet, he really has a capacity for creating a classic story, even if it is modern. I think the flip side of The Odyssey for me is that it actually feels the opposite. It actually feels to me like he's created this modern story, but it's set in ancient times. And it really is something that's hard to grasp until you've seen it and you kind of sit with it a few minutes, I think. But it is an amazing thing that he can take this story that is so old and modernize it and make it something that's relevant today. So that starts with the fact that, yes, he's reworked the story. And not in huge ways, but subtle ones throughout. And he's used this one scene that I'm not going to talk about because this is spoiler-free, but he's used one scene as the key to the story. And there are pros and cons of that, which I'll get to in a minute. But it's effectively, he's using this story in a new way, bringing kind of a new mood, a new spirit to this story. And wow, we have Odysseus and he's gone off for this war. And where has he gone? When are we ever going to see him again? His wife and his son want to know that because his kingdom is basically falling apart without him. And all these suitors have lined up because Odysseus has been missing for so long. And some of the performances we get out of this are amazing. And then on the flip side, we've got Odysseus with his crew and this army that starts out gigantic and over time dwindles as they try and get home. And it's that first thing of trying to win the battle and how that goes with the Trojan horse and everything else that happens through that journey to get him back home. All of it stays so true to the original story, but Nolan has a trick here. And that's the fact that he's turned this into, you can interpret a curse into this and everything else, but he's given it modern day ideals in the sense of that it's an anti-war war film. There's very much this idea of the wrongs that humanity creates, the wrongs that men do in the acts of war, and how evil it kind of turns them. What is the justice that comes from that? Everything else. That is a major theme. And I think, the hero's journey that we've seen over the years from many films, paying homage to this story, but in different ways, Nolan has taken that and changed it. And it is the dark side of the hero's journey of coming out the other side of maybe a sense of PTSD. Whatever you want to look at it as, he does not glamorize what Odysseus goes through. And it's very cool to see. It's almost in some ways a twin to Oppenheimer. I can see kind of that equivalence that you have these men who do terrible things and come out the other side. All of that to say that it is a wildly interesting story. He goes deep and dark and heavy. The creatures are fantastic. I will say there's a few scenes, a couple special effects that don't work for me. And mostly that's when I feel like they relied heavily more on digital effects. There's some practical effects in this that are mind-blowing. Circe and everything else around that scene, which I'm not going to get into, but you probably know the story. It's a mixed bag for some of those special effects. There's a couple that really bothered me. There's a couple that are fantastic. And Nolan still has that element of surprise that I think comes from his unique approach to special effects. I won't give any of them away, but I think, seeing the grandeur of his real props and sets and things interacting on screen is amazing. And I saw this film in 70 millimeters. It looks amazing. But then we got to talk about the downside of all this. And that comes from a technical side, I think, as well. He shot this film 100% IMAX, which I think this is the first one that was completed that way. And it's problematic in the sense of he could only film for about 2.5 minutes at a time to get any moment in the film. And I can only imagine what that meant for the actors. But unfortunately, I think it causes issues in his storytelling. I think if he'd approached this another way technically and done just a 70 millimeter digital, I get that there's he wanted to do real IMAX film, but it does seem to harm the storytelling. I do think that there is a momentum that is lost in some scenes, that you can almost feel that some scenes are almost shorter than they should be, and the scenes that are longer take a unique approach. I do think there's a problem there, and I hope he addresses it in the future, either to turn to digital or find another way that he's not going to be so, he's got an albatross around his neck trying to deal with this problem, basically. Then we got to talk about the actors. Matt Damon is one of my favorite actors. I love him, and he holds this film perfectly. He is Odysseus. There is no question by the end. He lives and breathes this role. He's fantastic. I will say that in a film packed with spectacular performances, though, I didn't get the Oscar feel from him, and I was expecting that. I was hoping for that almost, because I do think Matt Damon has put in his dues. He kind of is owed something. I think he's Oscar worthy throughout his career, but I do question if this is the one that should win him an Oscar. I don't know. Anne Hathaway as Penelope, as Odysseus's wife, is really special. This is a phenomenal performance. She is so good in this role. She owns every piece of this breathtaking heartache of losing her husband and never knowing where he is, but wanting to believe that he's going to make it home. And it is such a performance. Anne Hathaway has put in her dues in Hollywood, and I do think that she won Best Supporting Actress in the past. I think this is her best performance maybe ever. This is an amazing performance in a deeply resonant film that really sticks with you, and I loved every minute with her. I hope that she wins the Oscar for this. And then there's Tom Holland as Odysseus' son. I expected great things from him, and he delivered. He is so good in this film. He just has this charisma, this natural kind of almost kingly attitude about him that makes it perfect that he's supposed to be the heir to the throne. And where does that go and what happens? At the same time, there's something you can see in him in this performance, the kind of character who is not, the greatest warrior. He has some trepidation. He is not, going to go out and destroy armies. So it is really interesting to see that performance in this story. I loved him. Robert Pattinson as one of the suitors to Penelope is just vile. He's a great mini villain in this. I do think it's weird that his performance at the end tapers off. The last few scenes, I do blame the script to some degree. It's not great. There's moments that could have been a lot better, I think. But he is really impressive. I could definitely see him getting an Oscar nomination for this as a supporting actor. I don't know that I'd pick him, but it's an amazing performance. I just think that there are moments where I felt like he wasn't in the same film as some of the others, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think he actually brings some real character and juice to this, which is, I mean, in the end, this is a bit of a soap opera. It's just that Nolan has adapted it in a way that is so much deeper than that is so much more modern. Samantha Morton as Circe is, wow, just one of the greatest actors. It's great seeing her show up for this meaty, angsty role. It is amazing. Zendaya as Athena is wonderful. I don't think she has a lot to work with, but just wonderful seeing her in this film too. CHARLIZE THERON as Calypso is far and away one of my favorite performances in the film. She is wonderful, a little eerie, just fascinating in this role that kind of, she shepherds Odysseus through a part of this film, and it is just fantastic. And John Leguizamo as one of the court kind of helpers, I've always been really blown away by his performances. This is a really special one. It very rightly could earn him the Academy Award nomination for supporting actor. I would love to see that. I could even see him winning it, although it's going to be tough this year, but I was really blown away. And there's so many more that I just can't get into them. It would be the longest video ever. But fantastic performances, just beautiful storytelling, amazing things. But here's where I'm going to say my doubts about the film, and that's that I don't think every audience is going to be patient enough with this film. It is a slow burn to some degree. It is long, but it does pay off. I will say that the final scene isn't as climactic as I want it to be. I think it does open the door for interpretation about how you're going to interpret that final scene is interesting. I think as well that there's an emotional moment near the end that pays off beautifully. I almost think it should have lingered longer. That's the biggest complaint I have, and should have gone a little deeper. And in the end, those last 30 minutes are so important. And I don't think Nolan paid off all of that collateral that he's kind of gathered together throughout the film. He didn't pay it off quite well enough. That's my complaint. I love the film. I can't wait to see it again. In 70 millimeters, I didn't see it in IMAX. I saw it in 70 millimeters, and it was beautiful because it didn't fill the room. You were just kind of focused on this gigantic screen and these details. And that was enough for this film. It was great. No matter how you see it, it will be amazing. But it is not Nolan's greatest film. I'm still having a hard time placing it. It's certainly in the top 5. I think it might be 4th or 5th. And that's not bad. That is still amazing. His work at his top 4th or 5th is still better than most directors. But that's my complaint, is that I don't think the script was quite strong enough. I think his filming methods hampered some of his emotional reach in some of these scenes, and I think that it should have almost been a little shorter, if I'm being completely honest. I can think of a few things I might trim a little to make this kind of fit a little better, or he should have gone even more epic, because there's an element of this film that is stripped down. It feels beautifully stripped down, but that hampers some of the emotional reach for me, because there are moments where you're just focused on the person on the screen and that's it. And some of those scenes should have been deeper, bigger, bolder. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to ruin this film, but it's fascinating to see where he takes it. I love that he's flipped the story around. I think taking a new approach on it in this day and age is important. He put his own thumbprint on it. So what did you think of the film? Once you've seen it, I'd love to hear your comments. I think it's a fascinating film to discuss, and that's why I think it is such an important piece of art. It is still phenomenal in that way that we're going to be talking about it probably for years. But let me know what you thought. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it.